My family drained my bank account, so I quietly dismantled their entire life. My name is Vivian Cole. I'm 32 years old. This is the story of how my family drained my bank account, and so I quietly dismantled their entire life. The morning my life changed started like every other. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 5:30 a.m. Outside, the world was still a deep, quiet blue. I made my coffee, strong and black, and sat at my small kitchen table. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle clicks of my keyboard as I did a pre-work check on my finances. It was a ritual, a moment of control. I liked seeing the numbers line up. They were logical. They made sense. I opened my banking app. It spun for a moment, then froze. I sighed, closing it and reopening it. Technology was never as reliable as a simple ledger. The screen finally loaded, the familiar green and white logo giving way to my account summary. I blinked. Then I blinked again. The numbers couldn't be right. They had to be a glitch. My balance read 4713. Just yesterday, just 12 hours ago, it had been over $68,000. That wasn't just a number. It was my down payment on a small condo. It was my emergency fund. It was 10 years of scraped together savings, of saying no to vacations and fancy dinners. It was my entire life, quantified and stored in one safe place. And it was gone. My heart started to pound, a frantic trapped bird against my ribs. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. It had to be a mistake, a system error, maybe fraud. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I was about to dial the bank's emergency line when my phone buzzed on the table. A text message. It was from my mother. "Don't panic, honey. It's a family emergency. We'll return it next month." I stared at the screen until the words blurred, the pixels dissolving into meaningless dots. Panic wasn't the right word. What I felt was a sudden, terrifying emptiness, a void that opened up right in the center of my chest. They hadn't even asked. They had just taken that message, so casual, so dismissive of my entire world, wasn't an apology. It was a declaration. It was the first domino in a long, silent line. It was the moment I stopped being their safety net and started to become their lesson. Before I tell you how everything flipped, I just want to say thank you for listening. Like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. To understand how a family can justify stealing from their own, you have to understand the economy of our household. It wasn't an economy of dollars and cents, but one of roles and expectations. And my assigned role was to be the bedrock, the reliable one, the one who made sure everyone else had a soft place to land. My brother, Jason, 2 years older, was the dreamer. His dreams were always big, flashy, and expensive. He was the kind of person who radiated a confidence that others mistook for competence. Our parents saw him not for what he was, a charming man with no follow-through, but for what he could be. They saw a future CEO, an innovator, a star. They poured their hopes into him like a bad investment, never checking the returns. My sister Leah, 4 years younger, was the heart. She was delicate, artistic, and felt everything so deeply. Her moods dictated the emotional temperature of the house. If Leah was sad, the entire family went on high alert to find the source of her sorrow and eradicate it. Her happiness was a fragile treasure that we were all tasked with protecting, and I was the numbers girl, the fixer. My worth wasn't tied to a bright future or a delicate heart. It was tied to my utility. I was the family's walking, talking calculator. I remember this dynamic cementing itself when I was 10. It was a hot summer afternoon. Jason was in the backyard with his friends, attempting to build a go-kart out of my father's old lawnmower engine and some scrap wood. Leah was in her room painting, with our mother hovering nearby, praising every brushstroke as a work of genius. I was at the kitchen table, a place that would become my command center for the next 2 decades. Spread before me were the weekly grocery flyers, the utility bills, and a small gray calculator. My dad sat across from me, a worried look on his face. "Okay, Vivi," he said, his voice low and serious, as if he were briefing a general before a battle. "The transmission on the car is shot. It's going to cost $600 to fix. I don't know where we're going to find it." He called these sessions our special puzzles. I didn't know then that he was outsourcing his parental anxiety onto his 10-year-old daughter. To me, it felt important. It felt like I was helping. While Jason was being loud and Leah was being beautiful, I was being useful. I spent the next 2 hours hunched over the table. I found coupons in the flyers. I calculated that if we switched to the generic brand of cereal and laundry detergent, we could save $20 a month. I pointed out a subscription service my dad had signed up for and forgotten about. I created a payment plan in my neat, blocky handwriting, showing how, if we postponed paying the cable bill for 2 weeks and used the money from my piggy bank, $37.52, we could afford the repair. When I slid the paper across the table, his face broke into a wide smile. He scooped me up in a hug that smelled of sawdust and coffee. "That's my girl," he'd said, his voice thick with relief. "So responsible. What would I do without you?" The praise was like a drug. It made me feel seen. It made me feel essential. It was the beginning of my servitude, and I walked into it willingly, believing it was love. As I got older, the stakes of the puzzles grew higher. When I was 16, I worked 40 hours a week during the summer at a local ice cream shop. My arms ached from scooping and my feet were always sore, but I loved the independence. I saved every dollar, meticulously tracking it in a ledger. I had my eye on a 1998 Toyota Camry, a beat-up but reliable car that sat on a used car lot on the edge of town. It was $1,500. It represented freedom. I had saved almost $1,000 when my mother approached me. She sat on the edge of my bed, her expression pained. "Honey," she began, twisting her hands in her lap. "Jason has this incredible opportunity. A leadership conference in Washington, D.C. It could open so many doors for him." I knew what was coming. I could feel the walls of my dream closing in. "We just can't swing it right now." "But you're so good at saving. It would just be a loan. He'll pay you back as soon as he gets his first big job." I looked at her, and all I could see was Jason's smug, confident face. I thought about my aching feet and the smell of stale waffle cones that clung to my hair after every shift. "I'm saving for a car, Mom." Her face fell, a mask of profound disappointment. "A car? Vivian, this is your brother's future. Sometimes in a family, we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." The guilt was a physical weight. Was a rusty old car more important than my brother's future? According to the family economy, the answer was a clear no. My practical, tangible dream was worth less than his abstract, uncertain one. I went to the bank the next day and withdrew my savings. Jason went to the conference. He sent a single postcard that said, "DC is epic. TX for the cash." He never paid me back. The Camry was sold a week later. The pattern continued. My college years were a blur of work and study. I attended a state university an hour away, sharing a cramped dorm room with 2 other girls. My life was a carefully constructed budget. I lived on instant noodles and free pizza from campus events. I worked in the library, shelving books in the silent, dusty stacks, and I tutored freshmen in economics. I graduated with honors, a finance degree, and 0 debt. I was intensely proud of that. Meanwhile, Jason was on his 3rd university, a private art school this time, having decided he was a visionary filmmaker. My parents took out a second mortgage to fund his tuition and his artistic lifestyle. Leah was at a scenic liberal arts college in Vermont studying poetry. Her Instagram was full of pictures of snowy landscapes and trips to Burlington for artisanal cheese. I would see her posts while eating a packet of saltine crackers for dinner in the library basement. They never had to worry about money. They had me for that. The calls would come once a month. "Vivi, honey, Leah's meal plan doesn't cover her weekends and she needs to eat. Viv, I need to send Jason some money for film equipment. It's for his senior project. It's very important." I would always send it. $100 here, $200 there. It felt like a tax. The price I had to pay to be considered a good daughter, a good sister. The day I got the job offer from a major financial firm in the city, I was ecstatic. It was a validation of every sacrifice, every late night, every missed party. I had a real salary, benefits, a 401k. I had finally built something for myself that they couldn't touch. I was wrong. My new job only escalated my role. They threw a small party for me at the house. My dad clinked his glass with a fork to get everyone's attention. "A toast," he announced, beaming at me. "To my daughter Vivian. She's not just a numbers girl anymore. She's our official family accountant." Everyone clapped. Jason smirked and said, "Does that mean you'll do my taxes for free?" Leah hugged me and whispered, "I'm so proud. Maybe you can help me figure out a budget for my trip to Italy after graduation." They didn't see me. They didn't see my hard work or my ambition. They saw an asset, a resource that had just matured. My promotion wasn't a personal achievement. It was an upgrade to the family's financial infrastructure. I was no longer just the emergency fund. I was the central bank, and they were all about to make the biggest withdrawal of my life. My success was not my own. It was simply a larger pot for them to dip into. And for years, I let them. I paid for my dad's failed business ventures, funded Jason's endless stream of startups, and bankrolled Leah's whimsical lifestyle. Because every time I thought about saying no, I could feel the cold chill of my mother's disappointment, my father's disapproval. Their love was conditional, and the condition was my compliance. It was an economy I couldn't afford, but one I didn't know how to escape. The drive to my parents' house was a 20-minute trip I could have made in my sleep. But on that morning, everything felt alien. The familiar green of the highway signs seemed too bright. The chirping of the birds in the trees along the road sounded like mocking laughter. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I kept replaying the conversation with the bank representative David in my head. His calm, professional tone was a stark counterpoint to the screaming chaos in my mind. "I'm sorry, Ms. Cole," he had said after I insisted there must be some mistake. "The system is quite clear. The transfers were authenticated via two-factor verification sent to your registered cell phone, and the memo line, transfer to joint family account, was entered manually for each transaction. But there is no joint family account," I had whispered, my throat tight. "That account doesn't exist." "I understand that, Ms. Cole, but the memo is just a text field. It doesn't validate an actual account. It's just a note. As far as the bank's security systems are concerned, these were legitimate transfers initiated by the account holder. Legally, our hands are tied." His words echoed in my ears. Initiated by the account holder. They hadn't just guessed my password. They had been in my house. They had used my computer, my phone. The violation felt deeper, more personal than a simple hack. It was an invasion. When I turned onto my parents' street, my heart sank. Parked in their driveway, where my dad's 10-year-old rust-spotted sedan usually sat, was a massive, gleaming black pickup truck. It was the kind of vehicle that screamed midlife crisis, absurdly large for a suburban contractor who mostly did small-scale renovations. And tied to the grille in a final grotesque flourish was a giant puffy red bow. It was a celebration. They were celebrating. I parked on the curb and walked up the driveway in a trance. I didn't knock. I used my old key and let myself in. The house was quiet except for the low murmur of a talk show on the television in the living room. They were all there, a perfect picture of domestic bliss. My mother was on the sofa, feet up, scrolling through her iPad and sipping from a mug. She was wearing a new silk robe. My father was in his favorite armchair reading the newspaper, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. And Jason was at the dining room table, his laptop open, looking every bit the hotshot CEO in a crisp new polo shirt. They looked up as I entered, their expressions shifting from placid contentment to mild surprise. "Vivian, honey, what a nice surprise," my mom said, her voice warm and welcoming. She didn't get up. "You should have called. I would have put on a fresh pot of coffee." I stood in the entryway, my purse clutched in my hands, my knuckles white. I couldn't bring myself to step further into the room. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice came out as a strained rasp. I cleared my throat and tried again, stronger this time. "Where is my money?" My mother's smile tightened just a fraction. She set her iPad down on the cushion next to her. "I sent you a text, dear. I told you not to panic. It was a family emergency. A $68,000 emergency?" The number hung in the air, obscene and unbelievable. What emergency costs that much money in the middle of the night? My dad sighed, a long theatrical sound of paternal weariness. He slowly folded his newspaper, making a neat crease down the middle before placing it on the ottoman. He looked at me, not with guilt, but with a look of mild irritation, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. "It wasn't one thing, Vivian," he said, his voice calm and condescending. "You have to look at the bigger picture. Leah's wedding venue had a sudden cancellation, and if we paid in full immediately, we got a 20% discount. That's just smart money management. It saved us thousands." I stared at him dumbfounded. "You stole my life savings to get a discount?" "Don't be so dramatic," Jason piped up from the table, not even looking at me. His eyes were glued to his screen. "It's called capitalizing on an opportunity." "And your opportunity, Jason?" I asked, my voice dripping with a sarcasm I didn't know I possessed. "What visionary venture required my down payment?" He finally looked up, his expression one of pure arrogance. "I needed seed money for my new app. It's a social media platform for pet influencers. It's going to be huge. I had to secure the server space and hire a coder. You can't launch a business with empty pockets, Viv. I thought you, of all people, would understand investment. And the truck." I shot at my father, my voice rising. Was the truck an investment too? What part of the family emergency was a brand new, fully loaded pickup? My father had the audacity to look offended. "That truck is a business expense. It's an investment in my company's image. You have to look professional to land the big clients." My old car was falling apart. It was a necessity, a necessity. My future, my security, my decade of sacrifice was a necessity for his image. The room began to feel small, the air thick and unbreathable. I looked at my mother, pleading with my eyes for her to show a single shred of remorse, to tell me this was all a terrible misunderstanding. She just offered me a soft, pitying smile. She got up from the sofa and came toward me, her arms outstretched for a hug. I flinched back as if she were on fire. Her arms dropped to her sides. "Oh, Vivian," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "It's not stealing if it's family. We are a unit. We support each other. Your father, your brother, your sister, they needed help. You had the money. It's that simple. You always have more than you need, tucked away in those accounts of yours. It's better for it to be out in the world, doing good for the family, than just sitting there collecting dust. Doing good." I looked past her, at the smug entitlement on my brother's face, at the unshakable self-righteousness on my father's. They had taken everything, and they had already rewritten the story in their heads to make themselves the heroes. A story where I was the selfish dragon, hoarding treasure, and they were the brave knights who had liberated it for the good of the kingdom. I felt something inside me break. It wasn't a loud, shattering sound. It was a quiet, cold snap, the final overstrained thread of filial duty and naive love. In that moment, they stopped being my family. They became a liability, a problem to be managed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The rage was too deep, too cold for that. I simply turned and walked out the door. The last thing I heard was my mother's sigh, followed by her saying, "She'll get over it. She always does." The first 72 hours after I walked out of my parents' house were a colorless fog. I called in sick to work, something I had never done before, citing a sudden migraine. The lie felt small and insignificant compared to the lies that were now my life. I barely moved from my couch. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I had unplugged my landline and put my cell phone on airplane mode. The idea of hearing any of their voices, even a recording on a voicemail, was physically repulsive. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there staring at the blank television screen as the sun rose and set outside my window. The numbness was a mercy. It was a thick wool blanket protecting me from the raw, gaping wound of their betrayal. But I knew it wouldn't last. On the fourth day, the numbness began to recede and the pain flooded in. It was a sharp, brutal agony. With the pain came the humiliation. I thought about having to tell my realtor that I could no longer afford the condo I had put an offer on. I thought about the credit card bill that would be arriving soon, a bill I had planned to pay off in full with money that no longer existed. Every corner of my life, a life I had built with such painstaking care, was now compromised. That evening, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I took my phone off airplane mode. It immediately exploded with a barrage of notifications. 21 missed calls, 43 text messages. I started with the voicemails. My mother's voice was the first one I heard, syrupy sweet and utterly clueless. "Hi honey, it's Mom. Just wanted to see if you wanted to come over for dinner on Sunday. I'm making your favorite pot roast. Call me back." The message was from the day after the confrontation, as if nothing had happened. The next one was more strained. "Vivian, this isn't funny. You need to call me. Your father is getting upset." My father's messages were short and demanding. "Vivian, this silent treatment is immature. Call your mother." And later, "I'm your father. You will answer when I call." There was no apology, no remorse, just anger that I was not performing my role as the compliant daughter correctly. Leah's messages were a masterclass in self-absorption. "Vivi, hi! So, the caterer needs a final head count, and I don't know if I should include you or not. Mom said you were being weird about the money, but I really hope you're still coming. It won't be the same without you. Also, can you look at my registry and see if the crystal is too much? Call me." But it was Jason's single text message that truly solidified my resolve. It read, "Seriously? You're going to blow up the family over some money? Grow up, grow up." I had been a grown-up since I was 10 years old, balancing their checkbooks. I had been the only adult in the room for decades. That text, so dismissive and cruel, was the spark that ignited the dry tinder of my grief and turned it into a cold, hard rage. I didn't reply to any of them. I blocked their numbers. All of them. It was a surprisingly simple act. A few taps on a screen and they were gone. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of control. My old routines became my lifeline. I went back to work and threw myself into my projects with a ferocious intensity. My focus had never been sharper. Analyzing complex financial statements was a relief. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't make excuses. They simply were. After work, I went to the gym. I found a heavy bag in a deserted corner, and using the instructions from an online video, I learned how to punch. I wasn't a natural. My form was clumsy, my knuckles raw. But with every clumsy, breathless swing, I imagined their faces. My mother's placating smile, my father's condescending gaze, my brother's arrogant smirk. I would punch until my arms felt like lead and sweat dripped into my eyes, and for a little while, the rage would quiet. On my long walks home through the city streets at night, the plan began to form. It started as a vague desire for justice, but slowly it sharpened into a series of concrete, actionable steps. They saw me as an emotional creature who would eventually get over it. They had forgotten my greatest strength. I wasn't emotional. I was analytical. I was meticulous. And I kept excellent records. That weekend, I reactivated my long-dormant Facebook account. It felt like venturing into enemy territory, and what I saw took my breath away. They weren't just spending my money, they were flaunting it. My mother had posted an entire album titled A Girl's Best Friend, filled with professionally lit photos of her new diamond bracelet and a matching necklace. She tagged the high-end jewelry store. Dozens of her friends had commented with fawning praise. "You deserve it, Carol." Stunning. My father was tagged in a photo on the dealership's page, grinning like a lottery winner next to his truck. But it was the caption he had written himself that made my blood run cold. Hard work pays off. Proud to finally get the truck I've always deserved. Hard work. My work. Jason's Instagram was a cesspool of my stolen future. There were pictures of him and his friends at a 5-star restaurant, raising glasses of what was clearly very expensive champagne. The caption, celebrating the launch of visionary ventures. The first of many. CO life. Entrepreneur, artsy hustle. He had even posted a picture of a sleek new laptop and a top-of-the-line smartphone with the caption, "New gear for the new HQ." My money had become his props for a life he hadn't earned. I didn't feel a single tear. The pain was gone, burned away by the cold fire of my new purpose. I took screenshots of everything. Every post, every photo, every comment, every timestamp. I saved them in a newly created password-protected folder on my computer. The folder was labeled Evidence. I opened a new Word document. At the top, I typed, Itemized List of Expenditures. I began to log every purchase I could find, creating a timeline of their spree. The jewelry, the truck, the champagne dinner, the tech gear. They thought I was broken and hiding in the dark. They were half right. I was in the dark, but I wasn't hiding. I was watching, I was documenting, I was rebuilding. Not my savings account, but a case against them. Brick by evidentiary brick. The silence wasn't a retreat. It was my war room. My apartment, once a place of refuge, now felt like a forensic accounting lab. The work I did for my employer from 9 to 5, sifting through financial records, identifying discrepancies, and building cases of corporate fraud, became a dress rehearsal for the work I did for myself from 7 until midnight. My personal project was, in every way, more complex and carried far higher stakes. This wasn't about recouping losses for a faceless corporation. This was about reclaiming my own life. I started by using my professional expertise in ways that were ethically gray, but felt morally necessary. I had access to software suites that could do deep dives into digital footprints. I began with the jewelry my mother had so proudly displayed. It was a simple matter of cross-referencing the date of her Facebook post with the transaction records from the account she'd funded with my money. The charge from the jeweler was there, clear as day. I went to the jeweler's website and found the bracelet and necklace. The total price made me dizzy, nearly $12,000. I saved the digital receipt, a time-stamped proof of purchase that linked my stolen money directly to the diamonds on her wrist. Next was my father's truck. His boast about hard work paying off echoed in my mind as I tracked the down payment. $25,000, transferred from my savings to his checking account at 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. The dealership he tagged in his photo had their inventory online. I found the exact model, a fully loaded monstrosity with a sticker price that was more than my annual salary when I first started my career. The down payment matched perfectly. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Each discovery felt like a small, cold victory. I worked with a detached precision, treating my family members not as people I had once loved, but as subjects in an investigation. Subject A, Carol Cole, expenditures include luxury goods. Subject B, Robert Cole, expenditures include vehicle and undeclared credit lines. Subject C, Jason Cole, expenditures include entertainment, technology, and fraudulent business capitalization. I documented everything in my spreadsheet, which I had retitled from Evidence to something more fitting, The Undoing. The columns were meticulously organized: date, amount, source of funds, expenditure subject, and evidence file link. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Jason hadn't just used my money for champagne and a new laptop. I found invoices for a high-end web developer and a graphic designer for his Visionary Ventures logo. He was building a brand, a respectable facade, using my stolen money as the foundation. The irony was sickening. He had spent his entire life coasting on other people's work, and now he was literally trying to buy the appearance of success with mine. The work was grueling and emotionally draining. Some nights I'd stumble upon a detail that would momentarily shatter my composure. I found a receipt for a dinner at a fancy Italian restaurant, a place my mother and I had always talked about going for a special occasion but never did because it was too expensive. She and her friends had gone there the week after they emptied my account. They had ordered the lobster. It was a small thing, but it hurt more than the truck. It felt personal. It was a confirmation that she had not only taken my money, but was now living the life I had put on hold, a life I was saving for. But the moment that changed the entire trajectory of my plan came late one night. I was running a background financial check on myself, wanting to assess the damage to my own financial profile. I expected to see the drained savings account and the recent credit card debt I'd been forced to accumulate. But there was more. So much more. My credit report loaded, and I felt the air leave my lungs. My pristine credit score, once nearly 820, had plummeted to the low 600s. The reason was listed in bright red letters: delinquent accounts. I scrolled down, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. There were 2 credit cards I had never seen before. One from a major national bank, another from a high-end department store. Both had been opened in the last 30 days. Both were issued in my name with my social security number. Both were maxed out to their limits, a combined total of over $20,000, and both were past due. I clicked on the application details. The mailing address for both cards was my parents' house. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just them taking cash that was in my account. This was a deeper, more sinister betrayal. My father, the man who had taught me to be responsible, who had kept all our family's important papers in a lockbox in his office, had used my identity. He had taken my name, my reputation, my years of perfect financial responsibility, and had used it to fund his lifestyle. He didn't just steal my past. He was actively poisoning my future. I leaned back in my chair. The rage I felt so cold and so absolute it was almost peaceful. This was no longer a family dispute. This wasn't about money anymore. This was a federal crime. Identity theft. Credit card fraud. The game had changed. My hands, to my surprise, were perfectly steady as I opened my spreadsheet. I added 2 new lines under my father's name. I typed in the credit card names, the balances, the dates they were opened. In the final column, under legal infraction, I wrote the words that sealed their fate: aggravated identity theft, bank fraud. Looking at the completed spreadsheet, I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound, clarifying calm. Revenge, I realized, was a messy, emotional outburst. It was about inflicting pain. That wasn't my goal. My goal was equilibrium. It was about accountability. It was about restoring order to a system that had been thrown into chaos by their greed and entitlement. They had operated under the assumption that the rules of the world did not apply to them because they were family. I was about to teach them, in the most clinical and undeniable way possible, that they were wrong. The undoing was no longer just a collection of my pain. It was a meticulously crafted legal weapon, and I was now ready to use it. The spreadsheet, the undoing, became my anchor in a sea of controlled chaos. It was my plan, my evidence, and my shield. For another week, I did nothing but refine it, ensuring every claim was backed by an irrefutable digital paper trail. The emotional component was now almost entirely gone, replaced by the cold, clear logic of a professional audit. The subjects of my investigation just happened to be my family. The first move had to be precise. It couldn't be an emotional outburst. It had to be a series of strategic, impersonal actions. For that, I needed a collaborator, not for emotional support, but for technical expertise. I thought of my colleague, Nina. Nina was a cybersecurity consultant in our firm, a quiet woman who spoke in clipped, efficient sentences and possessed a mind like a steel trap. She moved through the corporate world like a ghost, her work invisible but essential. We weren't friends. We rarely spoke about anything beyond work, but I respected her immensely. She saw the world not as a web of relationships, but as a series of systems. And right now, I needed someone who understood how to break a system. I invited her for coffee under the pretense of discussing a complex data security issue on a shared project. We sat in a small, neutral cafe far from our office. For a few minutes, we talked about work. Then I took a deep breath. Nina, I said, my voice even. I have a personal problem that requires your specific skill set. It's a sensitive matter. It involves fraud. She took a slow sip of her espresso, her dark eyes watching me over the rim of the cup. She didn't offer platitudes or expressions of concern. She just waited. My family, I continued, has stolen a significant amount of money from me. More importantly, my father has used my social security number to open fraudulent lines of credit. Nina's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of professional interest in her eyes. Identity theft, she stated. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. I slid my tablet across the table. It was open to the spreadsheet, the first of many documents I had prepared. I've traced the fund transfers and compiled the evidence. What I need from you is advice on the most efficient way to report the credit fraud to have the maximum and most immediate impact. I want the accounts frozen and the activity flagged before they can do any more damage. She spent 10 minutes silently scrolling through my work. She zoomed in on the screenshots of the credit card statements, on the saved PDFs of the online applications. Her focus was absolute. When she finally looked up, she pushed the tablet back to me. "This is not a personal problem, Vivian," she said, her voice flat. "This is a series of felonies. Your documentation is impeccable. You don't need my advice on efficiency. You need to file a police report and contact the credit bureau's fraud departments. In that order. The police?" The thought made my stomach clench. It was one thing to investigate them, another to involve the authorities. "Yes," Nina said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "An official police report is the cornerstone of an identity theft claim. Without it, the banks will treat this as a civil dispute. With it, they will treat it as a crime. The report number is your key. It unlocks everything." She then gave me a precise step-by-step plan. Don't call the generic customer service lines. Call the numbers for the dedicated fraud and security departments. Use specific terminology. State the facts clearly and without emotion. Reference the police report number in every conversation. She even gave me the name of a contact at one of the major credit bureaus. That night, I went home and executed the plan. The first step was the hardest. I went to my local police department's website and began to fill out an online identity theft report, typing my father's name, Robert Cole, into the field marked Suspect Information. Was one of the most surreal and painful things I have ever done. My hand trembled over the mouse as I uploaded the evidence. The credit card statements, the application screenshots. I felt like I was severing the final thread that connected me to my past, to the little girl who once sat at the kitchen table solving her father's puzzles. With a final, shaky breath, I clicked, Submit. A case number was generated instantly. That was the key. The next morning I started the calls. I took a personal day, and with Nina's instructions and my police report number in hand, I became a machine. "Yes, my name is Vivian Cole. I am calling to report 2 fraudulent accounts opened using my social security number. The police report number is 74AC3981. I repeated this sentence, or a version of it, a dozen times to different departments at the 2 banks and the 3 major credit bureaus. There was no emotion in my voice. I was not a daughter reporting her father. I was a citizen reporting a crime. I presented the facts as I had laid them out in my spreadsheet. I emailed my evidence packets to the fraud investigators. They were, without exception, professional and efficient. My meticulous documentation made their job easy. By the end of the day, the process was in motion. The 2 fraudulent credit cards were frozen. Investigations were opened. A fraud alert was placed on my credit file, meaning no new accounts could be opened without my direct verbal consent. The first ripple effect reached me 2 days later. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, began to buzz with a relentless stream of calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer, but they left voicemails. The first was from a frantic-sounding sales manager at the department store. "Oh yes, Miss Carol Cole. This is Jim from Neiman Marcus. I'm calling about the payment for the designer handbag collection you purchased. The card has been declined due to a fraud alert. We need you to come in and arrange an alternate form of payment immediately." My mother's new jewelry, I realized, wasn't the only thing she had bought. She had gone on a spree. I felt a grim satisfaction. The biggest domino fell that Friday. Out of a morbid need to see, I drove through my old neighborhood after work. As I approached my parents' house, I saw it. A tow truck was parked in the driveway, its yellow lights flashing in the twilight. My father's brand new gleaming black pickup was hooked up, its front wheels lifted ignominiously off the ground. My father was standing on the lawn, his face a mask of purple rage, shouting at the driver, who was calmly ignoring him. My mother was standing on the porch, her hands pressed to her mouth in horror. I didn't slow down. I just drove past, a ghost observing the wreckage. The fraudulent credit cards, it turned out, were only part of it. The down payment on the truck had cleared from my account, but my father had financed the rest. When the bank that held the loan was alerted by the credit bureaus of the massive fraud investigation linked to his name, they had likely triggered a clause in his loan agreement. His credit was now toxic. The truck was being repossessed. That night, my blocked folder was a war zone. Dozens of texts and missed calls. From my mother, "Vivian, what did you do?" "They took the truck." "Call me this instant." From my father, "You will regret this. You have no idea what you've done." From Jason, "Mom is hysterical. You need to fix this now." I read the messages with a strange sense of detachment. They weren't asking what was wrong. They weren't asking if I was okay. They were furious that their supply chain had been disrupted. They knew instinctively that I was the cause, but they still didn't understand the scope of it. They thought I had just called the bank and complained. They thought this was another tantrum, just on a larger scale. They thought I was trying to punish them. They were wrong. Punishment is an emotional act. This was a correction, and I was just getting started. The silence from my end, absolute and unbroken, seemed to confuse and enrage them more than any screaming match could have. For 2 weeks, the digital onslaught from their camp was relentless. Blocked calls, furious texts, manipulative emails sent from new addresses. They were like children banging on a locked door, unable to comprehend why it wouldn't open. They were accustomed to my eventual capitulation, and my refusal to engage was a variable they hadn't planned for. During this time, the consequences of my actions continued to mount in their world. Jason's Visionary Ventures bank account, which had been funded by a direct transfer from my savings, was flagged and frozen for suspicious activity as part of the broader investigation. The web developer he had hired sent me a courtesy email, forwarded from Jason, stating that his invoices were unpaid and work had been suspended. The facade of his new life was crumbling before it was even built. They were flailing, and their desperation made them predictable. I knew they needed to confront me, to force me back into my designated role. So I decided to set the stage for them on my own terms, in my own territory. After 2 full weeks of silence, I sent a single simple text message to a group chat with my parents and siblings. "I'm hosting a family. Dinner at my apartment this Saturday at 7 p.m. There are things we need to discuss." The replies were almost instantaneous. My mother, "Oh, thank goodness." "Of course, honey. We'll be there." I was so worried. My father, "It's about time." Jason, "Fine, but you're explaining why my business account is locked." Leah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, added a single heart emoji. They read my message as a white flag. They thought I had come to my senses, that I was ready to negotiate my surrender. The dinner was, in their minds, a prelude to an apology from me, a tearful reunion where I would admit I had overreacted and promised to fix the problems I had created. Their arrogance was my greatest advantage. The day of the dinner, I prepared my apartment like a courtroom. I cleaned until every surface gleamed. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, the bitter scent filling the small space. There would be no food. This was not a social gathering. I walked to my desk and picked up 3 thick manila folders I had prepared. I had printed everything. Every bank statement with highlighted transfers, every screenshot of their celebratory social media posts, every fraudulent credit card application, a copy of the police report, and letters from the bank's fraud departments. Each folder had a name neatly typed on the label: Robert, Carol, Jason. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum, and opened it. They stood there on my welcome mat, a united front. My father looked stern and imposing, ready to deliver a lecture. My mother clutched a bottle of wine, her face arranged in a practiced expression of pained forgiveness. Jason lounged against the doorframe, scrolling on his phone, the picture of bored indifference. Even Leah was there, standing slightly behind them, looking nervous. "Vivian," my mother said, pushing the wine bottle into my hands. "I'm so glad you came to your senses. We can put all this ugliness behind us." I didn't take the wine. I stepped back and held the door open. "Please, come in." They entered my space, and the shift in power was immediate. In their house, they were in control. Here they were visitors. They looked around my small, tidy apartment. It was a world away from their sprawling, mortgage-to-the-hilt suburban house. My life was small, contained, and entirely my own. "It's cozy," my mother said, the word sounding like an insult. "Smells like coffee," Jason muttered, slumping into my armchair. "Where's the food?" "I'm starving." "There is no dinner," I said calmly, closing the door behind them. "Please, sit down." They exchanged confused glances but sat on the couch. I remained standing. I walked over to the coffee table, where I had set out 4 mugs. I poured coffee for each of them, a slow, deliberate act. They watched me, the tension in the room thickening. This was not going the way they had planned. Instead of sitting, I picked up the 3 folders from my desk and placed them on the coffee table in front of them with a soft, definitive thud. One in front of my father, one in front of my mother, one in front of Jason. "You wanted to discuss things," I said, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "So let's discuss these." My father eyed his folder with suspicion. "What is this, Vivian? More of your dramatics?" "Open it," I said. He snatched the folder and opened it. My mother and Jason followed suit. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of rustling paper. I watched their faces as they processed the contents. I saw the color drain from my father's face as he looked at a copy of the credit card application with his forged signature of my name. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth as she saw a screenshot of her bragging Facebook post about her new jewelry next to the bank transfer from my account, timestamped 2 hours earlier. I saw Jason's smug smirk dissolve into a slack-jawed stare as he looked at the official notice of his frozen business account, which listed receipt of stolen funds as the reason. It was all there, meticulously organized, cross-referenced, and undeniable. My work, my pain, my proof, all bound in 3 simple folders. "You stole $68,000 from my savings account," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "And you," I said, looking directly at my father, "used my identity to fraudulently open $20,000 in lines of credit. Those are felonies." The silence stretched. Then, Jason let out a short, incredulous snort. He tossed his folder onto the table. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, shaking his head. "What are you going to do with this, huh? You wouldn't turn in your own family. You don't have the guts." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt a profound sense of pity for him. He was so blinded by his own entitlement that he couldn't see the reality of the situation. I gave him a small, sad smile. "You're right, Jason. I wouldn't turn you in." I paused, letting the flicker of relief on their faces register. "I don't have to. I already did." My father's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. My mother just stared at me, her face a crumpled mask of disbelief. And then, right on cue, there was a sharp, authoritative knock at the door. They all flinched as if they'd been struck. The sound was loud, official, and final. I didn't move. I just watched the blood drain from their faces as the reality of my words, and of that knock, began to sink in. The world of consequence-free living they had inhabited for so long had just come to a sudden, brutal end. The lesson was about to begin. I walked to the door and opened it. A uniformed police officer stood in the hallway, his expression neutral. He held a small stack of official-looking documents. He nodded politely at me before looking past my shoulder at the 3 figures frozen on my couch. "Robert, Carol, and Jason Cole?" he asked, his voice calm and authoritative. My father, a man who had never been at a loss for words, simply stared, his mouth slightly agape. My mother made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. "Yes," I said clearly. "They're right here." The officer stepped inside and handed each of them a document. They were summonses, official orders to appear in court to answer for the civil and criminal complaints filed against them. The civil suit was from me for the recovery of the stolen funds. The criminal complaints, for identity theft and fraud, were being brought by the state. The officer gave them a brief, procedural explanation, his words falling like stones into the silent room. He then tipped his hat to me and left. I closed the door, and the click of the lock sounded like a gavel. The aftermath was not a single, dramatic explosion, but a slow, agonizing collapse. The foundation of their world, built on an image of unearned success and propped up by my stolen future, crumbled piece by piece. I didn't have to do anything more. I had set the system in motion, and now the system was doing its work. I observed it all from a safe, quiet distance. My father's downfall was the swiftest. The summons was just the beginning. The fraud investigation from the credit card companies sent an official inquiry to his employer. He was a project manager at a large construction firm, a position that required him to handle budgets and client funds. A pending charge for financial fraud and identity theft was not something they could ignore. He wasn't fired, but he was demoted. They moved him from his management position to a desk job in logistics, a dead-end role with no client contact and a significant pay cut. He had built his entire identity around being a successful, self-made man. The humiliation of having to explain his new, lesser role was, I imagined, a punishment worse than any court could deliver. I found out about it when a former neighbor called me, her voice dripping with pity. to say she'd heard about my poor father's troubles at work. I simply said, "Thank you for your concern," and ended the call. My mother's world disintegrated more slowly, but just as completely. Her life revolved around her social status, her book club, her charity committees, her circle of friends who lunched at the country club. The court summons was a public record. A small local news blog that covered court filings picked up the story. It was a minor piece, just a few sentences mentioning a local family embroiled in a dispute over misuse of family funds and identity theft. But it was enough, the whispers started. My mother, who had curated a perfect image of a happy, prosperous family, was suddenly toxic. She was uninvited from a charity gala. Her weekly lunch group started meeting without her. Her Facebook wall, once a vibrant tapestry of social engagements, fell silent. Her friends didn't want to be associated with scandal, especially one so sordid. Her greatest fear, being judged and found wanting by her peers, had come true. Jason's collapse was the most predictable. His visionary ventures was a house of cards built on a stolen foundation. With his seed money frozen and his reputation now linked to a criminal investigation, his partners and the coder he had hired vanished overnight. His Instagram, once a monument to his feigned success, became his digital tombstone. The pictures of champagne and new technology were replaced by a stark, angry silence. He had no skills, no experience, and now no money. He was forced to get a job, a real one, working in the stockroom of a big-box electronics store. The CEO was now making minimum wage, surrounded by the very gadgets he had once pretended he could afford. Throughout this period, I didn't gloat. I felt no joy in their suffering. I felt a quiet, somber sense of order being restored. The universe was finally balancing its books. They had lived their lives on credit, and the bill had finally come due. A significant portion of the money, about half of it, was eventually returned to me through court-ordered restitution. It came in trickles, small amounts garnished from my father's reduced wages and Jason's meager paychecks. The other half was gone, consumed by their lifestyle. I knew I would likely never see it all again, but I didn't want it all back. Keeping it would have felt like holding on to the poison. So, I took the first large restitution payment, $10,000, and made a donation. I found a local non-profit organization that ran financial literacy workshops for women escaping abusive domestic situations. I met with the director, a kind, no-nonsense woman in her 60s. I told her a sanitized version of my story, that I had recently come out of a situation involving financial abuse and wanted to help others learn to protect themselves. I wrote the check and handed it to her. It was the best I had felt in months. I was turning the ugliest chapter of my life into something positive. I was taking the ashes of my old life and using them to help someone else build a new one. I didn't need revenge. I had something better, purpose. While their world was shrinking, mine was expanding. I went back to my realtor and put an offer on a smaller, more affordable condo in a quiet part of the city. My offer was accepted. I started packing up my apartment, feeling a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in years. I was finally truly on my own. I wasn't their accountant, their safety net, or their victim anymore. I was just Vivian, and for the first time that felt like enough. Months passed. The legal proceedings wound their way through the slow, methodical court system. My father and Jason both took plea deals to avoid a public trial, pleading guilty to lesser misdemeanors. They were sentenced to probation and continued restitution payments. My mother had the civil judgment against her for her share of the money, a permanent stain on her financial record. The storm was over, and a quiet, if desolate, calm had settled. I had moved into my new condo. It was small, but every inch of it was mine. I had painted the walls a soft gray, bought a new couch that I picked out myself, and started a small herb garden on my balcony. My life was simple, orderly, and peaceful. I had changed my phone number and had a new, unlisted address. I had created a fortress of solitude, and I was content within its walls. One afternoon, I came home from work to find 3 envelopes in my mailbox. They had been forwarded from my old address. I recognized the handwriting on each one instantly. My heart, which I thought had become immune to them, gave a small, painful lurch. It seemed they had one final salvo to fire. I took them inside and laid them on my kitchen counter, staring at them as if they were unexploded bombs. For a moment, I considered throwing them away unopened, but I knew I couldn't. This was the last chapter. I needed to read it to finally close the book. I made a cup of tea, my hands steady, and sat down to read their final arguments. I started with my father's letter. His handwriting was angry and cramped, the pen strokes digging into the cheap, lined paper. It was not an apology. It was a manifesto of self-pity and blame. Vivian, it began, I hope you are satisfied. You have successfully destroyed your family over a misunderstanding. I have always worked hard to provide, and sometimes that requires making difficult decisions. The truck was a business necessity, something your mother and I felt was a wise investment. The credit cards were a temporary measure to manage cash flow during a difficult time. A temporary measure that I had every intention of rectifying. For you to take a simple family matter and turn it into a criminal case is a betrayal I will never comprehend. You have embarrassed me at my job, humiliated your mother, and ruined your brother's chances. Some things are more important than money, a lesson you have clearly never learned. Your father. I read it twice, searching for a single word of remorse, of accountability. There was none. He still saw himself as the patriarch, the decision-maker, whose actions were beyond reproach. He hadn't stolen my identity. He had managed cash flow. He hadn't stolen my savings. He had made a wise investment. In his mind, I was not the victim. I was the villain who had failed to understand his noble intentions. I folded the letter and set it aside. There was no anger left, only a profound, weary sadness for the man he would never be. Next was my mother's. The envelope was made of expensive, cream-colored stationery. The letter inside was written in her looping, elegant cursive, but the paper was warped and blotchy in places. A theatrical performance of shed tears. My dearest Vivian, it started. My heart is broken. I don't know how we got to this place. Everything I have ever done has been for my children, for my family. All I wanted was a beautiful wedding for your sister and a chance for your brother to follow his dreams. I saw the money in your account, and I didn't see it as yours or ours. I saw it as the family's good fortune, a way to make everyone happy. Perhaps it was wrong not to ask, but my heart was in the right place. I did it for love. How can an act of love be a crime? I lie awake every night thinking of your coldness in that apartment, the hatred in your eyes. You have chosen money over your own mother. I pray that one day you will find it in your heart to forgive me for loving my family too much. Your loving mother, Carol. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Every sentence was crafted to cast her as the loving, misunderstood matriarch and me as the cold, unforgiving monster. She was the victim of her own overwhelming love. The letter was a tapestry of guilt, obligation, and emotional blackmail. The same tactics she had used to control me my entire life, but they didn't work anymore. I could see the threads now. I saw the performance for what it was. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a demand for my submission. I placed her letter on top of my father's. Finally, I picked up the last envelope. It was a cheap, standard business envelope. Jason's name wasn't even on it. Inside was a single piece of paper torn from a spiral notebook, with 2 lines scrawled in a messy, aggressive hand. You always wanted to be right. Congrats. That was it. No pretense, no manipulation, just pure undiluted narcissistic rage. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was just furious that he had lost. In his view, this had all been a game, a contest of wills, and I had won. He didn't see the morality, the legality, the profound betrayal. He only saw the scoreboard. I sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, the 3 letters lying before me like artifacts from a dead civilization. They were the sum of my family. A man who could not be wrong, a woman who weaponized love, and a boy who could not lose. And in their final words to me, they had given me the greatest gift of all, confirmation. They proved in their own handwriting that they were incapable of change, of introspection, of remorse. They had validated every painful decision I had made. I didn't need to reply. What was there to say? Answering them would be an invitation to re-engage, to step back into the toxic, circular arguments that had defined my life. Silence was not a punishment. It was a boundary. It was the closing of a ledger that could never be balanced. I stood up, took the 3 letters, and walked to the small shredder I kept by my desk. I fed them in one by one. I watched as my father's justifications, my mother's manipulations, and my brother's bitterness were sliced into a meaningless confetti of paper. The noise of the machine was the only sound in the room. A final, grinding end to a lifetime of pain. When it was done, a profound peace settled over me. The book was closed. The account was settled. A year later, life is quiet. The quiet is the first thing I notice in the morning and the last thing I hear at night. It's a gentle, peaceful quiet, not the loud, aching silence of loneliness. It's the sound of my own life, uninterrupted. I live in my small condo. It's filled with sunlight in the afternoon and the scent of the basil and mint I grow on my balcony. I brew coffee in a kitchen that no one else has keys to. I read books on a couch that no one else has a claim on. My life is beautifully, wonderfully, blessedly boring. There are no more surprise withdrawals, No more frantic phone calls, no more guilt-laced demands disguised as requests. My bank account balance grows steadily, predictably. Every dollar I earn stays exactly where it belongs. With me. It's not just money. It's my time, my labor, my future. And it's finally mine. Sometimes when people at work talk about their family holidays or weekend barbecues, I feel a small, ghostly pang of something I can't quite name. It's not regret. It's more like a memory of a phantom limb, the ache for a family I wished I had, not the one that was. But the feeling passes quickly, replaced by a deep, abiding gratitude for the peace I have now. When a new acquaintance asks why I'm not close with my family, I don't tell them the long, sordid story. I just say, we had a fundamental disagreement about boundaries. It's true, in its own way. Their boundary was non-existent. Mine is now made of steel. I didn't dismantle their lives out of vengeance. Vengeance is a hot, messy fire. What I did was cold, clean, and necessary. It was an audit. I simply exposed the truth and let the natural consequences unfold. I wrote them out of my life, but they handed me the pen when they forged my name. Now, I write my own story. It's not a dramatic tale of high finance or bitter revenge. It's a simple story. A woman, a quiet home, a balanced ledger, and a peace that is truly priceless. I hope my story can help someone else who feels trapped. Remember that you have the right to protect your peace and your future. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.